This is the Middle-earth philosopher. One of the most perplexing mysteries to me has been what happened to Ainur that were killed, or some equivalent of it at least. It was a question that first came to light when I first read the Silmarillion, and how it talks about early on during the First War of Arda that it was between Melkor and his followers and the Valar and their followers. When one reads or hears about a war occurring, the natural assumption is that people are going to die. Combatants are going to die. But this was a time before any of the children of Iluvatar came into existence. The only creatures of any intelligent thought and action were the Ainur spirits. And they were spirits, not mortals. So this automatically leads one to think that they can't truly die as we understand it. In the end, death is merely the end of life in a mortal vessel, not the end of the spirit or the consciousness itself. But you read about that war and then all the destruction that took place and whatnot, and I find it hard to believe that there were no casualties, so to speak. Within the four main books Tolkien wrote, the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings trilogy, there are only 4 specific instances mentioned of the fate of an immortal Ainur after they die. Morgoth is finally defeated, but not specifically slain, and instead is sent into the void, perhaps as a forced embodied spirit. Sauron is nearly killed once by Huan, and then killed 3 more times after that. Once by Uru, indirectly, during the fall of Numenor, the other at the end of the War of the Last Alliance, and the final, off-screen kinda, during the Return of the King. The book describes his death as an angry cloud rising into the air, but dispersed by a great wind, condemned to remain in Middle-earth as a malicious but impotent spirit, never able to affect Middle-earth ever again. The third, and in my opinion the most perplexing, is that of Saruman. In Return of the King, after the hobbits defeat him and his forces to liberate the Shire, he is then killed by Wormtongue. His end begins the same way that Sauron's final end did, as a spirit that rises, but is then rejected by a cold wind out of the west. Only this time, it says that the spirit with a sigh dissipates into nothingness. Melian isn't killed, but before the first fall of Morgoth to the dwarves, dissipates like Sauron and Saruman, but is allowed to return to Valinor. And then lastly, it's worth mentioning the Balrogs that were destroyed over the course of the 3 ages. The books never clarify what happened to their spirits as it does with the others. If you want, you can take Gandalf's command to the Witch King in the Return of the King movie as a possible option to return to the darkness that awaits him and his master. But other than that, what's going on here? Despite all these characters being divine spirits, they all seem to meet different fates, even if it's just slightly. I think it largely depends on who you believe is giving out these fates and the severity of their deeds in Arda. For Morgoth, he was judged, though not physically destroyed, during the War of Wrath, and is instead sent into the Timeless Void, a realm that existed outside of Arda in time and space, and where ironically he spent much of his time searching for the secret fire long before the creation that was ever made. He was forever trapped there and bound there, no longer able to interact with any of the realms inside of Arda ever again. There is supposed to be a final battle of some sort in Tolkien's early iterations where he returns and basically fights everybody ever, but Tolkien seems to have either dropped that idea or at least didn't have enough time to develop it any further. Morgoth's judgment is basically to be denied the one thing he spent his entire being trying to dominate/destroy, and sent to a place where he can do nothing more than spend the rest of eternity wasting away in his insanity at being powerless to cause any more chaos. And perhaps this fate was exclusive to him because he was a Valar. Moreover, the Door of Night, and probably the Door of Morning as well, were the only access points to the Void during that time at least, unless Iluvatar overruled his own laws of Middle-earth and took a spirit on a one-way trip into his halls. Jumping procedure. Sauron, however, is denied such a judgment. He suffers having his mortal form killed multiple times, but his spirit, or the will that drives it, bides its time, still growing more and more in malevolence, yet somehow also able to rebuild a new body from scratch over long periods of time. Sauron doesn't end up in the void because he never went to Valinor to get tossed to the door of night, into the void. Would he have been had he been judged in Valinor after the War of the Ring? Perhaps, but as it is, he is bound to Arda like all the immortals that are there, no matter what happens to him. And Iluvatar has not seen fit to pull one of those exception cards and pull Sauron directly into the void. Moreover, if you believe that the wind that blew Sauron's spirit away was sent by Uru himself rather than Manwë, then that would mean that Uru would have put a similar judgment on him as he did Morgoth, barred from having any interaction in the world that he so desperately tried to control and rule, yet still also bound to its rules as set by Uru himself. A loophole, basically. Since the majority of Sauron's power and being was stored within the now destroyed One Ring, there was now no more chance that he could rebuild yet another body and rampage across Middle-earth over time. So, therefore, he's just a weak, invisible, and malicious spirit that is doomed to basically wander Middle-earth, hating people and not basically being able to do anything about it. Saruman, though, is a perplexing one because of the final line about his fate in Return of the King, that a cold wind bending his spirit away from the west, and then that spirit seemingly choosing to dissolve into nothingness with a sigh. Is this a case of Ainur's suicide? No other case mentions anything about a spirit that dissolves into nothingness, just wandering the world impotent, or perhaps sent to the void or going back to Valinor. Here, however, the book specifically says nothingness. I tried researching this more to get some sort of final official word on what happened to him, but beyond interpretations, I couldn't really find anything that could be used as a addendum, as it were, to Return of the King's official statement. So I suppose it depends on what you consider canon for Tolkien. But the final fate of Saruman might be the only case of an Ainur ceasing to exist. Melian's fate is similar to her brethren, with the exception that she is allowed to return to Valinor. She pieces out before the first Battle of Menethil, fading away. There's no body or remains to do anything with, save whatever garment she may have been wearing when she gave up her mortal form, and probably just fell to the floor when she disappeared. And then lastly is the Balrogs. Now, the only thing specifically said about the Balrog's fate is that they are destroyed. After that, there is no further concern, mention, or record of them pulling a Sauron and rebuilding their own bodies as well, nor of being sent to Valinor for judgment to be exiled beyond time and space forever. Again, in my research, I couldn't find anything other than that the spirits were supposed to be indestructible, as it were. Their forms could be killed, but their spirits cannot be destroyed. So, I have to go by implication or interpretation, that by the lack of any future presence and concern over the Balrog's return, like that of Sauron's, that either they were not powerful enough to recreate physical bodies, or that they lacked the knowledge to do so, which actually carries some currency, because like I said in my video on the Balrog some time ago, that they were basically Morgoth's shock troopers, rather than strategists or people who thought independently, like Sauron and Glaurung, both of whom were destructive in their own right. Perhaps the Balrogs would have needed Morgoth's will to inspire or empower them to recreate bodies, but that doesn't seem to be the case either. Even Gandalf, when he was sent back, had to be done by Uru himself. He never makes a new body. So, it's entirely possible then that the Balrog spirit was doomed to just basically wander Middle-earth as a hateful and invisible specter that could do nothing but just hate on everything that exists and unable to do anything about it whatsoever, like that of their master. But regardless, those are my thoughts on those questions of what happens to Ainur after they die. Again, it seems like that for the most part it's pretty clear cut, with the one possible exception of Saruman. And that Saruman, again, might be the only case of a spirit in Middle-earth literally ceasing to exist, not just wandering around as an invisible spirit. But let me know your thoughts below, or perhaps if you found information that I didn't. This is the Miller Philosopher, and you all have a good day.